We notice that everybody gets a little later as the week goes on. I think we should actually be starting a little later. Although I hope you know we actually are starting later this year and ending a little earlier and having a little longer breaks. You all gave us feedback about that last year, and we took it to heart. So I hope that works for you. Okay, I have people coming in. Great. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started because we're starting to get behind before the day's even begun. So, how many of you got up and did the run this morning? Wow. Terrific. So this is a picture that was taken early this morning of some of the brave souls who went out running in the dark, and I suspect the rain. Was it raining at that point? Later. Okay, good. Well, congratulations to all of you, and you will be the healthiest ones in the room today. Next thing I want to do is welcome the newest NetHope member who was voted in yesterday afternoon at the member meeting. And it is, and I'm not a French speaker, Médecins Sans Frontières. Pretty close? So I'd like to welcome their delegate to come up and introduce himself and the organization.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Speak right into the mic.
That's what they're for, no? Good morning. My name is Niels van op Zeeland. It's very international. I work for MSF International Office. And we got voted in yesterday. I would like to present a little bit about MSF. For those that do not know MSF, what we're really doing. So we are a private, independent association. We're focused on medical, humanitarian aid, mainly in emergency situations. So we consist of, I give you the simple version. 21 executive sections. About 12 branch offices and a whole lot of other entities. We have about 500 missions now worldwide, over 70 countries. And 1.5 billion in euros were raised with the donors. That was in 2016. And 95% of that is private, which gives us a lot of independency. So one of the things we do with this independency is that we speak out, which I remind you later on, that comes back. So we have, of these 21 sections, we have 5 operational directorates, and the abbreviation makes sense, we call them OCs. So 5 OCs we have in Amsterdam, 1 in Brussels, Paris, Geneva, and Barcelona. And these 5 OCs actually do the missions in the field. All the others, including the head offices for these countries, these cities, they do fundraising, communication, and recruitment for people in the field. And the international office is a kind of a secretary to these sections. So when we work together, we work in platforms. So each functional platform has an international coordinator. So for IT, I'm the coordinator for international office. I work together with the 21 heads of IT, and I have no vote, no mandate. So that's it's a challenge. I knew that before I started. Since we are so independent, it's quite a challenge also to work together internationally, especially on IT projects. We do, however, see a transformation in converging. One of the first success stories we have is Office 365. So we are globally now on Office 365 for mail and for contacts and calendars. That is, it's also opening a lot of other applications, of course, and for this we are building up the governance to roll out, to make sure that we all think globally and act locally, because people speak out and they want to be independent, so they want to have their own SharePoint environment, but working together is a challenge with these organizations. We're also working on a field network kit to make sure that all these missions have similar network kits and a shared service center to support all transversal services or transversal projects. And that's specifically for IT. So we've seen many topics that we would like to share and contribute with within NetHope members. We really look forward to working together with all of you. We hope to learn from you and to contribute from ourselves. I think I will skip for the next 2 or 3 years the Fail Fest to give some room for building up. But that's, I think that's a logical sequence of our organizational structure. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for voting us in, and I'm looking forward to working together with all of you.
Always exciting when we have a new member join, and this is a wonderful organization. We're so happy to have them with us. Speaking of people to thank, we could not do the summit without our sponsors. The cost of putting this on is far more than the ticket price, and our sponsors make this possible. And that means all of us owe them a big thank you. And I would really like to encourage all of you today to make sure that you get out there to the exhibit hall, speak to the sponsors, thank them. The exhibit will come down this afternoon, so this is the last chance. Our setup this year is a little awkward, and I think there's kind of a mental barrier to people making their way to the back of the hall or over here to the far end. You may have noticed we have plants in over here on the far end. They're not getting very many visitors on the ends. So if you could all please make a point of reaching out and thanking them, that would be really wonderful. And we need them, and they need to feel our love. So please, please let them know that. Specifically, I also wanted to call out that one of the things we did different this year is rather than having an individual sponsor for the Monday night welcome reception, we actually asked all the sponsors to chip in and help sponsor that. So they were all the sponsors of the Monday night reception, which worked really well and I think was good for all of us. So a big thank you to all of them for that as well. Unit 4 was our happy hour sponsor last night. We really appreciate that. I'll talk in a second about our sponsors for tonight. A couple things I also wanted to call out before we get started. Evaluations. So Frederick gave me some stats this morning. If you look at all the sessions we've had thus far, times the number of people we have, and then look at the percentage of evaluations that have been completed, it's really dismal. It's like 4%. So that means you all need to do a little work. And here's the good news. You can go back and rate sessions that already happened if you were in them. So for instance, how many of you enjoyed the Fail Fest on Monday? Yeah. I've heard a lot of positive comments about that, but we need you to go in and make those comments and rate it so that we know that it was something that people want to see again another year. So I also know that the really want some feedback. They need to know if it was something that resonated with you. They need to know if it's something you want to hear again about in the future. So please, please go in and fill out your evaluations on Pathable in the description of the program or presentation. One other piece of interaction that we need you to participate in, you will see that, and they were here yesterday, so I don't know which room they've been moved to, but look around for them. We have what's called digital skills posters. Lauren referenced this work in her keynote yesterday. One of the things we're doing is building out a solid list of what it would mean for an organization to have digital skills in its workforce. And we've come up with a draft, a starting point, and we really need you all to add to it. So if you come across this poster, you'll see there's a hanging from it, and we'd like you to read and add anything to the poster that you think would be helpful. This is really helpful feedback for us as we go back and finish developing this. Now, to today's agenda, a couple specific things I want you to know about. we have a special lunchtime presentation. I think until yesterday we'd never had a lunchtime presentation at the summit. I could be wrong. Not in recent history, but we have another one today. Art Min from the Paul G. Allen Philanthropies Group is going to be speaking about some of their conservation efforts. So this will be up in the Ocean View rooms. Please grab your lunch and have a seat, and we'll see what Art has to share with us. Also wanted to note that there's one session this afternoon that's moving from this afternoon to tomorrow. The details are there. I won't repeat them. And then one of the highlights of today is the field trips this afternoon. If you are signed up for the field trip, remember what I said yesterday, you actually have to show up on the agenda. If you go into Pathable and your name actually shows up, then you're signed up for it. If you've been told you're signed up but you don't see yourself there, you're not signed up. The buses or the walking group, one's a bus, one's a walking group, need to meet out front by 2:30. The buses are going to be leaving from there if you're going to UBC, and the walking group that Click is sponsoring, which is going to go to Flyover Canada and then a local pub, I believe, will be meeting out front as well. I understand there will be some Click folks there with t-shirts on, so you should recognize them. And the other thing I would say, these are both very popular field trips, and if you are signed up and cannot go, would you please let Madeline at the front desk know, because somebody else would like to take your spot. So it would be good if we didn't have empty spots at those field trips. And then tonight, the big night is the NetHope Community Celebration. This will be at 6:30 at the aquarium. If you are going on the UBC field trip, your bus will automatically take you to the aquarium afterwards, so you will not be coming back here. Keep that in mind. If you are on the Click field trip or not doing any field trips, there will be buses out front starting at about 5:50 to about 6:10 that the rest of us will take over to the aquarium. If you miss one of those buses, you are on your own to get yourself to the aquarium. It's not very far. It's probably a 20 to 30 minute solid walk. You could also grab a cab, something like that. But we will start at 6:30 at the aquarium. It's going to be a lovely evening. And thanks to our sponsors, CDW and Click, for what will be really just terrific. And you will enjoy the aquarium immensely. And I think that's all for now. I'm going to invite Lauren Woodman up to introduce our first speaker this morning. Hope you have a great day.
Good morning, everyone. Our first speaker this morning, in all reality, needs no introduction, and has been a tremendous supporter of NetHope over the last couple of years. Secretary General Jan Eggman is with the Norwegian Refugee Council. I'm sure many of you know that, have seen him around over the last day or so. But I have to say that since NRC came into NetHope, they have had a profound influence on the way that we work. They have been incredible supporters and really energetic. You saw Pietro leading the agenda steering committee this year. And a lot of that has to do with the tone and the sentiment that NRC brings to the work that they do, much of which is inspired by Jan Eggman himself. Now, Jan has had a long history working in humanitarian affairs, working for OCHA, leading the Red Cross in Norway, working in the Norwegian government. But his work at NRC, I know, has inspired many, many of us. And I know his speech a couple of years ago at the summit in Copenhagen left many of us feeling inspired, a little concerned about the state of the world, but energetic about what one organization and one organization working in concert with others can do in raising the profile of the needs of so many around the world. So with that, I am exceptionally pleased to introduce Secretary General Jan Eggman.
Thank you very much indeed, Laureen. Very, very happy to be back in NetHope. NetHope is very important for NRC. It's important for me because I am measured on how I am able to help the people in the camp that we will just see on screen very soon, which is Satari camp. And all of the other places where we try to help refugees. In this camp, which we set up with partners in the winter of 2012 and 2013 as a temporary measure for Syrians coming to Jordan. In this camp there was soon 100,000 refugees. There are still nearly that number 5, 6, 7 years later. In the camp, half of the people are youth. They are children and they are young. We help them with school, we help them with vocational training. One of the things that we teach are computer science. They have enormous hopes for the future. And whether they will have a job, home, a family, a future, will depend on what happens in Syria, what Assad is doing, what the Russians are doing, what the Iranians are doing, the Turks are doing, the Americans are doing. But it also depends on us. We, NetHope family, can help them better in the future. We're doing a lot now, but we can help them better in the future. We can more proactive. And my whole talk today will try to give an overview of the trends and the challenges in trying to reach out to 65 million refugees and internally displaced, but also some elements on how we can work better. Two trends to start with. Number one, it's a uniquely contradictory world we're living in. It is wrong that it's going worse for world population. It's actually going better, much better for the majority of us. Life expectancy is up, child mortality is down, disease control is up, education is up in 180 out of 190 countries. At the same time, the number of people in abject misery, in being displaced, being refugees, being disaster victims, is also up. So there is a growing minority that has never been worse off, and a growing majority that has never been better off. Second unique trend, several speakers yesterday, Lorraine and others, touched upon it. We've never had bigger opportunities to help. Never ever. I'm now 60. I've been working in the humanitarian world for nearly all of the last 41 years, since I started at the age of 19 as a volunteer in Colombia, Latin America. For my first 30 years as an aid worker, really, I feel today we were like amateurs. Our heart was immense, but our tools were inferior to what they are today. And what we will see in the next 10, 20 years is phenomenal compared to what we do today. I mean, in 20 years, we will regard us today as having very imperfect ways of communicating with, listening to, helping and empowering the most dispossessed. So a lot is at stake in a time when we see more refugees. This period is comparable, in my view, to one previous period where I have been was already professional, which was in the mid-1990s. You will see here we have estimated through our displacement monitoring centers in UNHCR, High Commission for Refugees, and in NRC, the total number of displaced. In the middle of the 90s, many of you were in school somewhere in primary school here then. I was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I felt overwhelmed. I was leading the Norwegian efforts at the time. It was the time of the genocides. Bosnia, Kosovo, and Rwanda. More people died in the period, that period compared to now. But if you go from 2012 onwards, many more people are displaced now than even during the genocides of the 1990s. There are now 65 million refugees and internally displaced. And the orange are the refugees, 25 million, and the yellow are the 40 million internally displaced. What's the difference between an internally displaced and refugees? Internally displaced have not been able to cross an international border and become a refugee. Another difference is that they are even worse off in general, the internally displaced, than the refugees. They are less protected. They are in a worse condition. It's harder to reach them. Two continents stand out in terms of refugees: Africa and Asia, Middle East. In Africa, nearly 20 million now internally displaced. Most of them are internally displaced and refugees. In Africa, as in nearly all continents, refugee flows are heavily concentrated. It is wrong that all countries are now overwhelmed by refugee flows. Very few are overwhelmed. But a country like Uganda is. Uganda took more refugees per day last year than most European countries took in the year last year. 50% of all refugees in Africa were received by Uganda, a country that did not close its border. It didn't do like the North Americans and the Europeans. It kept borders open. These are our brothers and sisters, they said, fleeing war in South Sudan. In terms of internally displaced, we speak less of them, and we don't really see them. So few were noticing last year that the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, again became an epicenter of a horrific war against the civilian population. And the highest number of internally displaced in the world, in Africa and the world last year, was the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, conclusion then here. Africans are not fleeing to Europe, they are staying in Africa. The most African refugees stay within the country or flee to a neighboring country. In fact, in the world, 9 out of 10 who flee end up in a poor, within a country, or to a poor country. Those who have less to share have the burden and the responsibility of shielding refugee flows. 32 million internally displaced and refugees. Very many of these in the Middle East. And no conflict in our generation, really, and I'm talking about in our 2 generations here present, have had as many displaced as Syria. We haven't seen this kind of epic biblical exodus, enforced displacement since the breakup of India and the aftermath of the Second World War. Syria had a pre-war population of 23 million or so. 12 million of those have been displaced from their homes. And it is in the, if you like, in the middle of the world. It's not in the periphery. It's the Middle East is north, south, east, west. That's where all things meet. And the 12 million are more or less equally now divided between internally displaced and in neighboring countries mostly. Another place that has gotten much less attention is Yemen. 2 million internally displaced, but another 17 million people not knowing where their, well, including this, another 15 million not knowing where the next meal will come from. Yemen is the place on earth probably today with the highest number of extremely vulnerable people that we're not really able to meet the needs of. Who's to blame in Yemen for this situation? I mentioned Syria. I think, well, MSF is speaking out, yes, so is NRC. In Syria, I would say that the government under Assad, supported by Russia and Iran, have a lot of the blame for why we ended up in this horrific situation. And then all of those others who fuel to the fire by also arming all sorts of extremist groups. In Yemen, the reverse. It's really those who are criticizing the Russians and others who are supporting the Saudi-led coalition that has the sanctions on the strangulation of Yemen, which makes it very difficult to fly, to ship there, to do anything to a place that needs to have 90% of its food imported. In short, I think part of what we need to do more in the future is call a spade and tell the world that these are very often not natural disasters. These are man-made from A to Z. Summing up then the refugee situation, we see that the largest recipient countries in 2016 was Uganda, #1. Actually, this year it will be Bangladesh among the biggest because of the Rohingya crisis. Then came Germany, Turkey, Sudan, Congo, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Sweden. So two, 3 European countries, and the rest are African countries. Most nations, I mean, Sweden 68,000, that's the number 8th. All other nations on the earth below that. It is wrong that Europeans, North Americans and others are overwhelmed by refugees. We are not. Uganda is. What about natural disasters? How does it compare then in terms of moving people away from their homes compared to conflict? It's worse in terms of numbers. The blue columns are natural disaster displacement, the orange conflict. So in the last decade really, from 3 to 10 times more people are displaced by natural disasters than by all conflicts combined. Why is there so much natural disaster displacement? Because more people in a growing world population live more exposed to more extreme weather. We're starting to see the effects of climate change, but it's also poverty and population growth. The trend, you can't see that just in a short period of time of 6, 7 years. But if we take from 70s to today, we see that a child born today have nearly a double risk of being displaced by natural disaster than we were, whether we were born in the 70s or the 60s or some even 80s, like some of us. So it's getting more and more dangerous, especially if you're poor. Summing up, and I mean, I'm giving how do we know as much as this? Because we have better technology. We can monitor more needs. And let me try then to show you over time how the trend has been in terms of conflict displacement. This is 1996. The places where most people were displaced. This is 2002. This is 2008. And then we superimpose countries that had substantial displacement caused by natural disasters. And we see it's most of the world, including a natural disaster displacement all over the Americas and all over Asia and Africa. Okay, so this is the challenge, or rather this is the status, the trends. Let's go further into the challenges. Starting then by saying we're making progress in assistance. Even in conflicts and natural disasters, we have thankfully much reduced malnutrition. We have much reduced epidemic disease. We have much reduced mortality, morbidity. We have more emergency education, as we call it. We have better shelter and so on. We can prove that. So the assistance is going better. The handouts is going better. Many of the services are going better. What's not going better, in my view, is the protection. So this girl, 6, with heavy responsibility for her brother, age 2.5, she doesn't first and foremost need another blanket. She needs peace. She needs to see an end to the bombing of her homes. She's probably displaced 3 times already inside Syria. She needs protection against these men with power and guns. So we don't have much power nor much guns, so what can we do to protect her and her brother? I think we can monitor better her situation. I think we can communicate better on her behalf. I think we can hold men with power and guns more accountable. I think there are many ways we can sort of reach her better, as we can with people in the Congo. So this is an area where my organization NRC is able to reach still, but there are few organizations able to reach the hard-to-reach areas of the world. We call it hard to reach, as opposed to besieged, when you really cannot even go into it, because that's fully military encircled. Congo is a place with millions of civilians, engulfed now in generations of internal strife, internal conflict, often fueled by external parties. It is so dangerous to work there. It is so risky, it's so costly, that very few organizations work in the really hard to reach areas. Too often we see maybe 90, 100 organizations registered in the capital city and able to work in the capital city and go in and out of the capital city. But in many of the most remote places where the needs are greatest, I was just in northeastern Nigeria last week, there may be 5 organizations, 3, 2. We need to be able to reach the hardest reached, and we need the help of technology to do that. Better communicate to the people, better help monitor the situation, know how we should help get the needs assessment better, and also improve security for our staff. In my organization, we have 12,000 field workers. There is not a day without a scare or an incident, we call it, which is a wrong word. It's really a horrendous attack or problem that our staff is involved in, because they are trying to reach the most vulnerable. And then we need help for durable solutions for the people. We're there to help the refugees, for example, the displaced. So I'm back again to this relentless increase. From 2012 especially, it's gone through the roof. The next one will be further up because of the Rohingya crisis and other things. Why is there more and more refugees and displaced? For 2 reasons. Too many wars, too many conflicts are allowed to unfold, and too few people are allowed to return or to land somewhere, like we have. The way refugee crises are 3. There's always been 3 possibilities. One is return to your home, which means it has to be safe there. Number 2, integration where you are displaced, which is hard because those places who shoulder the most of the refugees are overwhelmed. They are few. So the third option is relocation in the third place. And countries all over, including North America, I would say US more than Canada, but certainly Europe, my own continent, less and less generous in safe havens. I mean, the traditional safe havens are basically escaping, being safe havens. So we need help for durable solutions, advocating for more relocation to third places, but also helping people to return, to get a new opportunity. Many people can now return to Somalia, but there is only rubble there in many places. There's no livelihood, there's no nothing. We can help durable solutions. And we have to do it more efficiently. Because as has already been said, we have to do more with less, because the blue trend line are assessed needs. These are assessed needs. The number of people they need and exactly what they need is assessed. And the orange is actual money received for this work. And what we're seeing is that the gap is widening. There is less dollars per refugee for each and every year now. So technology can help. And a couple of examples. How can we achieve great impact together? And the whole togetherness is, of course, the magic of NetHope. We know the needs, and the expertise of companies knows how we can help meet the needs. I want to give some very diverse examples very quickly. I've been working now on behalf of the United Nations in trying to reach besieged areas in Syria. It's been one of the horrific parts of this war that the government forces but also armed opposition groups and terrorist groups have started what they did with great energy in the Middle Ages, namely starve out people in besieged cities. A city is held by a group of rebel men, and it's so costly to fight street by street and house by house and basement by basement that the army says it's actually cheaper for us to starve out these fighters, and we don't really care that there are 10,000 or more civilians with them. So one of these areas was called Deir ez-Zor, and it was besieged by none less than the Islamic State fighters for now 3.5 years altogether. The only way we could reach them was actually by airdrops. So airdrops is old, nothing new with it. The new thing was that you had to do it from more than 5,000 meters. This is meters, a lot of feet. And in the beginning we thought it was 6,000 because the question was what kind of missiles would the Islamic ISIL and Daesh fighters have. One of the first high altitude airdrop was completely unsuccessful. It was so heavy from such a height that the parachutes failed, and it turned out that the winds and the drafts and so on was so powerful, going down 5,000–6,000 meters, that we failed to hit the town football field, which was the only place you could that was possible to hit. Long story short, very smart people who are very good in math. They had all of these logarithms that they basically found out how to do it. And for the last 1.5 years, there's been airdrops every single day, and 95% of them have hit bullseye, irrespective of weather. It was technology that helped us reach these people, and then when they were now again able, Islamic State was beaten, and there's possible to go by truck again, they were still alive. It was technology. It couldn't have happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, that kind of high altitude airdrops. What about needs assessments? Well, again, I mean, needs assessments are a lot of things, and they are very sophisticated and have to be a lot of elements in them. But just one example how important it is now, even with, again, satellite monitoring and so on. It's always a question of, how the Rohingyas, why did they flee? Were they really persecuted? And also, what, if anything, do they have to return to? So it was very disputed. I mean, the government of Myanmar said, no, it's inexplicable why they flee, and nothing is really happening there, and maybe there was skirmishes with the guerrilla and so on, but it's all over. And then a whole overwhelming evidence of images showing that, I mean, all of the white spots are really a burnt down house. It was a scorched earth tactics that led them to flee, and they do not have much to return to. We have to know that as humanitarians in our advocacy and in our planning. There is a lot of optimism also that now Brave New World can solve all problems. Can they? Not necessarily. So, for example, drones are now a fantastic new tool for, again, surveillance, assessment, monitoring, and even delivery of very small quantities of very expensive stuff. Could be immunization, vaccines. Will they be able to feed places like Deir ez-Zor? No, they cannot. We need we need to deliver tens of thousands of tons still of food to big populations. It's not going to be drones. So the various kinds of the new tools can solve small pieces of the problems that we are facing. Forecasting is of course one of the biggest potentials here. If we can forecast what will hit a vulnerable population, we can prevent suffering and not just put endless plasters, band-aids on the wound. Now, for natural disasters, there is a lot of important now modeling of the effects of, for example, hurricanes. I think this is Hurricane Irma of this year, I think. And it's the NRC Internal Displacement Monitoring Center that has a lot of statisticians and computer people try to work with the World Meteorological Organization and many others in trying to forecast not only how strong a hurricane be and its path, but our contribution would be the expected displacement and the expected degree of destruction, which is very much related to how many people live there, how are the structures and so on. I think the forecasting will be one of the things where we will need the biggest help to do better in the future, including in providing what we call climate services. It's something that I've been working with quite a bit with the World Meteorological Organization. And there is now a so-called world framework, the global framework for climate services, which is an attempt to connect thousands of satellites and tens of thousands of scientists that are in all of these climate and meteorological centers around the world, able to predict a lot of things, of what will happen in terms of climate variability and climate change. The problem we have is that a girl in Haiti who is hit, every year, every 2 years, again and again, with devastating impact by hurricanes, is not really getting the information. Nor is the herdsman boy in the Horn of Africa, that we may know that, listen, the next 2 years, there will be such a drought that your goats will die, but we're not able to reach the boy and say, sell them now, restock when it's over. So climate services will be, for us, a way of explaining to aid workers, local authorities, national authorities, and communities affected, what will hit them and what our common defense mechanisms should be. Final, and my 30 minutes are over. Final example is, of course, perhaps the most classic in our group. It's the whole explosion of cash and e-vouchers by smart card or by cell phone or whichever way we transmit. Actually, this is from a market that was created by NRC and the ECHO, the European Union's humanitarian arm, in a remote place in eastern Congo, where the widows in the phone that we gave them would have the images of things that she could buy for the money we had wired her or transmitted electronically to her. And then the salesmen and women would be having the opportunity through the smart card to give it. It's a marketplace, basically. And I often, and it's been controversial within part of the humanitarian community. I mean, really, can we do this? Shouldn't we decide what she should have? And often then to do the other little exercise. Would I like that a person like me would come to us if we were displaced from Vancouver to Alaska by this enormous cataclysmic disaster? People like me come and say, what I will give you is the following, because I have decided that your needs are the following, or would I like to have cash to decide what my needs are? I would like to decide myself. So that is, of course, the empowerment of the people is very much connected with the cash thing, and the transmission is also now making everything much more inexpensive than it was when the bearded truck driver came with the boxes and gave to the widows. Problem here is perhaps, and so I'm ending with that, the protection part of it. We cannot end up in a situation where people are having a lot of communication with us by cell phone or by the internet, but there is no one there when the militia comes and tortures their house. Where we are perfecting assistance, we're not necessarily protecting the people. I am optimistic in my old age. I think, never before has there been a generation like Anne, who will speak after me, in terms of having greater resources, more knowledge, more education, better organizations, and better technology. So we have to be very ambitious in the coming years. We have to do better than we've done in the past. Thank you very much.
To listen to leaders who see the world at the worldview, think about what are the opportunities for us, not only from a technology perspective, but also in terms of where our organizations can work together and where our advocacy and our attention needs to be focused. Because when we focus our attention in those places, we come up with fascinating solutions. Jan spoke a lot about empowerment. Especially in the role that cash can play in empowering refugees. Empowering folks that have been displaced or suffered through often from very traumatic situations is a big effort for many of our organizations in terms of how we think about response. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker. Anna Reichert has really thought about what will help, what can aid, what can assist those that have been displaced as they think about their next role and building a new life in the new place in which they find them. She is the CEO and co-founder of the Ready School of Digital Integration, which works with refugees in building skills to build employment opportunities in their new home. I'm looking forward to what she has to say, largely because her background is so varied. She has worked in the academic side. She has worked in corporate social responsibility. She has been recognized as one of the young leaders in Germany. And it's that type of innovation and creativity and energy that someone like Anna brings to the space that gives us hope for what we can do for those that find themselves in a new place looking to build a new life. So let me be get off the stage here and turn this over. And Anna, let me welcome you to the stage.
Hello and good morning. So thanks a lot. It's a great honor to speak after Jan, who's one of my big inspirations. So thanks, Jan, for your service to humanity. And I hope that my generation is indeed following in those footsteps and taking humanitarian relief into its next generation. But I also say hello because we believe that this is where integration really starts. When two people start having a conversation And what most people, of course, see in this picture is probably Mark Zuckerberg sitting in the middle with his wife, Priscilla. And this photo was actually taken 2 weeks after we started our program. But what I like to see in this photo is actually a conversation that is taking place between Mark and Rami, who is sitting next to him. Rami is 24 years old. He was born in Aleppo, had actually never traveled before he arrived in Germany. Rami had studied computer science at Aleppo University for about 2 years when he was forced to leave his home country. But what is happening in this specific picture is actually that Rami is asking Mark for some advice. He's wondering what kind of programming language that he should learn in order to build a technology in the future that would allow him to have a better conversation with his mom back home in Aleppo. And the story that Rami is sharing with Mark is that his mom likes to send him text messages to just make sure that her son is okay. And every time that Rami gets this message, he feels very far away, far removed from his mom. But when they're able to have a video Skype conversation, they can see each other, he feels much more connected to his mother and his family back home. So Rami, being a programmer, is of course thinking about what is the kind of communication tools that he could have access to in the future, and how could he help build some of these tools. He therefore was wondering what kind of programming language would he need to learn in order to build a service that would allow him to talk to his mother in virtual reality or in augmented reality. And at that specific point in time, you could just see Mark's eyes light up, because all of a sudden, it wasn't a refugee and a billionaire having a conversation with each other. It was just two geeks talking about the technology that they both would like to build in the future. And that, in many ways, is what Ready School of Digital Integration that I started in Berlin is all about. It's bringing the refugee community that arrived in Germany together with the tech and the startup community to create something that is of great value to all of us. We all have heard about the big challenges that we are facing through the media. The numbers vary a little bit, but what I was able to find is that about 800,000 Syrians arrived in Germany between 2015 and 2016. But research also shows, and this is not amongst the Syrian refugee population, I would say, but if we look back, within 5 years of arriving in Germany, only 30% have actually gotten a job. This is, of course, a major cost to German society, but also a great loss of human talent amongst the refugees. But where other people like to see a big challenge, we as entrepreneurs like to see big opportunities. So the good news is that in the German tech sector, we're currently missing 51,000 people with tech skills. This is 18% more than last year, and this is not just a trend in Germany, this is probably the same all over Europe. You'll find a similar situation in Canada, in North America as well. It's predicted that in the next 5 to 7 years in Germany, we'll be missing about 500,000 engineers and natural scientists. And this is really where we saw a great opportunity to create what we call a win-win-win situation. What if we were able to build a tech school that would allow refugees to get the right kind of education in order to land some of the jobs that the German industry so sorely needs? Making sure that they don't necessarily receive money from the German government, but actually get jobs and become taxpayers. This would be good for all of us. But there's a long way from having a good idea to actually having an implemented school. So one of the core principles that we had when we started was really what I put up here. Stop talking about refugees and start talking with refugees. So from having the idea, we then started bringing together people, going out into the refugee camps around Berlin and simply making new friends. But we also went into the tech world and the startup scene in Berlin and gathered people and started bringing the refugees and the startup community together to have conversation about what would this kind of tech school actually look like. From there, we started doing small experiments to find out, does this concept that we have in mind actually work? We gathered 12 students and some volunteer teachers, and then we started teaching a 2-week course in December 2015. One of the great things about doing a pilot is you find out everything that you should not be doing. One of the things that we realized was that we had, at that point, collected about 50 laptops from friends and from family. But you can imagine if you're trying to run a tech school where 12 students have 12 different kinds of laptops. It was a disaster. So what we realized was we have to bring together all the laptops we've collected, donate them to a different refugee project that could need these laptops, and instead we started going out to companies in Germany asking if they could give us hardware donations, because in Germany, after 3 years, any German company can write off their hardware and get new. But after 3 years, the computer still works. So we were then able to start conversations with organizations like Deutsche Telekom and Zalando, Microsoft, and they donated the laptops that we needed. And this started a long relationship that I'll come back to. We then decided to found an organization, a rather bureaucratic process in Germany. It took us 3 months to create a social enterprise, but that meant that from February 2016, we could start our first courses with about 42 students. Now I also put our scaling strategy up here. Because at this point, we had been so much in the media already all around the world, and we could have started in about 20 different countries at that point. But it was important for me that we started small, that we really realized what we were doing, if what we were doing were actually working and worthwhile scaling. So nail it before you scale it became our second mantra. From there, we started growing. We started running courses also for children, bringing back our alumni as teachers and mentors. Here you see Asem, who is from Damascus, teaching actually 2 German students how to code. From there, we grew to be 135 students with 17 different courses. But at that point, we were all around Berlin. I think we were doing lessons in about 12 or 14 different places. So even though we were a lot of people engaged, it didn't really feel like a big community. So we decided to consolidate a little bit, bring everyone together under one roof, and really start building the community so that every teacher, every volunteer, and every student felt a part of something that was much bigger than their own effort. And when we started our last semester, a couple of months ago, we had now grown to be 156 students teaching 12 different kinds of classes. But let me tell you a little bit more about how this actually works. About 50% of our students have studied computer science before, but when you start studying programming, it's often very theoretical and you study a lot of mathematics, which means that you're actually not that employable by companies. So even the students who have a little bit of background still need to learn more practical skills. But we could also see a lot of the Syrians who arrived in Germany had studied at university and could potentially, instead of continuing their studies to become architects or to work in businesses, could become interested in changing their careers to work in technology. So a lot of the courses that we're providing is introduction to different programming languages like Java, Python. But for the people who like to work a little bit more hands-on, we also have robotics courses where they're working with Arduino. When you start at the school, the first thing you get is a laptop that you can keep for the 3 months duration of the course. As I said, these all comes from German companies. All our volunteers are practitioners who are working in startups and in tech companies. They then come to us after they're done with work to teach our students for a couple of hours every week. But we also run classes and courses together with large corporations. This picture is from a class happening at the Microsoft office, because what we realized was that a lot of large tech companies have a few hours that their employees are actually allowed to volunteer every month. We were able to package these up and therefore run courses at Microsoft, taught by Microsoft staff in a Microsoft relevant technology. And of course, this, in a 3-month package, more or less turned into a 3-month recruiting process, allowing the teachers to know exactly which student had a steep learning curve, who fitted well into the team. And we've seen that Cisco, that has run a number of courses, has already hired 9 of our students, SAP 2, Microsoft, we're still waiting for you to hire. But we also like to run courses and projects together with universities and nonprofit organizations. This picture was taken 2 weeks ago when we had a great experiment. You see Raz, who is a professor at Parsons School of Design in New York, given a lesson to our students sitting in Berlin, but working on a specific case together with the Norwegian Refugee Council for the people, creating livelihood for the people who are in Sub-Saharan camp. It's quite the experiment trying to combine 3 different continents. And the thing I absolutely love is that the teacher is actually from Japan, so we're pretty globally well covered. The first thing we do with the curriculum is that we get all the students together and we work with what is called the design thinking process. So over the course of 1 day, all the student teams of 10 people get together and they have to locate what are some of the challenges that they're facing in their daily life in Berlin. Then within a couple of hours, they have to come up with a paper prototype that you can see on the picture here, describing a website or an app that they would like to build to solve this problem that they have. One of the pictures, GB Games, that you can see here, stands for German Bureaucracy Games. And the idea was really that to navigate the German bureaucracy, it's a little bit like snails and ladders. So sometimes you go up, sometimes you have to dodge the challenges and go down a level just in order to come back up again. And what I really love about this idea is that they took something that is usually very, very difficult, being German bureaucracy, but they realized challenges are actually fun in the gaming world. So how could we combine these 2 things and have a game that would actually be educational to help both the refugees as well as the German bureaucracy? From there, it's 3 months of combining theory and practice, working together in order to make this idea that they had in the beginning real. It's a lot of peer learning, so the classrooms look a little bit different. It's not always a teacher standing in front. It's very much about the students and the teachers working together. And one of the things that our students really love is to go out and visit companies. So we have been to the tech department of Coca-Cola, we have been to Facebook, we have tested virtual reality with Zalando, we've been to accelerators in Berlin in order to inform our students about the different kinds of cultures, the different kind of businesses that they could arrive into or get a job in the future. But it's at their decision and they have to find out where the best fit is. And all of that is then presented at the end of our course in what we like to call the demo day, where you see all the students are on stage. The alumni are actually the people who present the newest class. And this is a wonderful event where we bring in the German tech industry to hopefully come and hire some of our students in the future. At the end of the course, what you get from us is a certificate. It's a personal letter of recommendation with a phone number and a name that future employers can call in order to check up if this is a good student to hire. We also created a yearbook for our students that they can show what they're being part of. But most importantly, we like to show what the students have actually built, the code that they have developed through GitHub. But in most places, getting a job is 50% about what you know and 50% about who you know. So a large part of what we do at Ready School is also making sure that the students have a good network amongst the teachers and the volunteers. We do tech talks where we bring in thought leaders on technology. And we do workshops training our students in core skills. Like what you see in this picture is Hosheng getting coached by 2 of Facebook's recruiters from London on how to do a job interview. And this is a small team making it all happen. We are 3.5 full-time equivalent that has made all of this happen in 1.5 years. But we are a community of about 500 former students and technologists. Now the good question is, of course, sounds like a nice program. Does it actually work? We ask our students or their alumni every month what they're doing after ending the courses with us. And what we have seen is about 50% are either in paid jobs or paid internships, 20% go back to university, and 10% start their own businesses. And here are just some of the examples of businesses that has been created. You remember the German bureaucracy games? They actually decided to change the idea a little bit, and they built an app called Bureaucracy. And the idea was inspired by Amazon and how you can check where your parcel is through the system. But imagine you could do something like that, but with your German papers to understand how far in the asylum-seeking process are you. Cutting down cost and cutting down time for the German bureaucracy as well. We also have Let's Integrate, which is a platform that allows locals and newcomers to meet each other, because one of the huge challenges when you are a refugee is to break out of what we call the refugee bubble. You study German with refugees, you live in a refugee camp with other refugees, and getting a local network is actually the one thing that could really help you become better integrated. But it can be difficult. The big picture shows Fadi, who is part-time working with me and part-time entrepreneur. He decided to start an organization together with his mother and his sister called Jasmine Catering, because he realized that there's a lot of Syrian women, 50 plus, who are having a very difficult time finding a job in Germany because they have challenges learning German. They also don't speak English. But what they're really good at is cooking. So they come together, they cook together, and because Fadi has learned digital skills, he has been able to set up a website, he's been able to set up a Facebook, and that's what they use in order to get in contact with large companies like McKinsey, like Cisco, who are now hiring them to come and do the catering for them. But what I like to focus on is really the role models that come out of the school. Here's a picture again of Rami, who you saw in the first picture with Mark Zuckerberg. He now works full-time for a German steel distribution company. And also, on top of that, he is back at university, and he actually managed to learn German within 2 months and became fluent in German so he could go back to university. I don't think that has ever happened before. He's an extremely smart guy. In the middle, we have Assem, who is one of the teachers of our youth program, but he's also just completed an internship with Cisco and is now back at university as well. And we have Omar, who is one of the team behind Bureaucracy, in this photo presenting their idea at the European Commission in Brussels. But we also like to encourage more public-private partnerships. It can be a little bit hard to see him in the middle of all our students and volunteers, but somewhere in the middle with a tie is Thomas de Maizière, who is the Minister of Interior in Germany. For the Germans in the room, you'll recognize that Thomas de Maizière never really smiles, so I think this is probably one of our biggest efforts. But I love, because this picture really shows the spirit of what Ready School is all about. It's breaking boundaries, and it's bringing ministers and ministries together with companies. In this case, it was a collaboration with Daimler, and together with our students to do what everyone would think is the impossible. And of course, we're also happy that we could welcome Angela Merkel in April this year, again, for having an eye-level conversation with our students. It gave Mrs. Merkel a great opportunity to ask a lot of the questions that she had been wondering about. What is the difficulties getting into university? What are the barriers that keeps refugees from being better integrated? And in this way, we're able to create a different kind of conversation, informing better policy. We have also been able to create new capacity in Germany. What happened after Mark and Priscilla came to visit the school was that we were able to develop a great relationship and a friendship with Facebook. And they asked us what was the one thing that we really wished for. And it was to have a school so that we could get all our students under one roof together with the volunteers. So what Facebook decided to do was to create the first digital learning center in the world, allowing not just our organization, but other organizations teaching tech skills to youth and to elderly people to come together. And because we have this wonderful platform in a physical space, there's great synergies between the different organizations working in this space. So we have seen that 2 of our students, Heba and Hadir, who originally come from Egypt, have actually become mentors of German senior people who are 70 plus, learning to use their mobile phones. And in this way, creating integration at a very different level. Now, the one question I often get is, where is the money? How are you funded? And I'm very happy and proud to say that we have not received any single euro from the German government. Everything that you have seen in this presentation is actually through partnerships with for-profit organizations. What we have been able to build is a platform that allows large and small companies to plug in, either as a platform partner. It could be to sponsor a program similar to what you saw with Microsoft. It could be a project like what I talked about with Daimler, or it can be startup companies taking in a refugee as a future employee. The list of our partners is long. It's a lot longer than what I was able to put on this slide, but it shows the diversity of how we're working with large educational institutions all the way to the German startups in Berlin. Now, where's our organization going? It's been a long journey, or at least it feels so. It's only been 1.5 years, but we've learned a lot on the way. Next for us is that we have partnered up with the municipality in Munich in order to start our second school. And the people who know Berlin and Munich know that they don't like each other so much because they're very different cities. But we're quite excited about this because we think that we can work in a different way with very large organizations who have their headquarters in Munich. We're starting our first pilot tests in November. Gesundheit. And the pilots will be with Microsoft, with Cisco, and with Google. And I really see this as our great opportunity to build a model that can not just scale within Germany, but scale hopefully across the world. I'm also personally extremely excited about the courses that will start from December. We can see that only 10% of our students so far have been women, and our ambition is to have 50% women. This is only the right way to go in the tech industry. But we also realize that we need to do different kinds of courses. We might have to provide childcare and food as part of our programs, but we've teamed up with Facebook in order to do a pilot over 1 year to try different projects out. Next year, we're also planning to start doing specific courses for children, bringing our students out to the refugee camps and to the welcome classes in Germany to become role models and to become teachers. And in the long distant future, which in the startup world is not very far away, what I would really love to see more is also how we can take Ready School into the refugee camps and create coding academies, creating livelihood for the refugees who are either internally displaced or stuck in refugee camps. This is a photo from a couple of weeks ago when I was able to go to Saturday and interview a lot of wonderful young guys and women to better understand what could this kind of program actually look like. So with that, thank you very much. And if you're ever in Berlin, please come and visit.
I'm really excited that you'll be joining the No Lost Generation Technology Task Force. Thank you. So let me click to the next slide there. Has it shown up? Here we go. So I'm with NetHope, and I'll take a few minutes to give you some context for why what Jan and Anna talked about matters so much to me and the work that we're doing at NetHope. And to do that, I'll actually take you back to the mid-90s. So again, bear with me. This is an important moment in my life, and specifically in the summer of '95, my parents, my little brother, and I decided to leave everything behind after the 4 years of a very bloody conflict in former Yugoslavia, and to flee just to save our lives. And we found ourselves in southern Hungary in a refugee camp that was set up by UNHCR. We were lucky to find safety and shelter and to actually have survived a very long journey through the Humanitarian corridor, which basically is a narrow road through the battle zone. And after initial shock of losing everything and becoming a refugee, which I never thought would happen to me at the age of 18, I looked around, and there I saw firsthand how displacement of children and youth can have a devastating effect on their well-being and also their future. So at that moment, I decided I needed to do something, and it seemed like education was a really good starting point for me because it is something that helped me during the 4 years of war. It was the only thing that nobody could take away from me, so I poured myself into learning and acquiring new skills that now, in '95, I had the opportunity to actually give to somebody else. So I begged the school principal to let me teach in a refugee camp with my high school diploma at the age of 18 with students in 4th grade through 9th grade. Some of them actually are older than me because unfortunately they had to skip many years of schooling in order to survive the war, and they were displaced multiple times. So it was incredibly rewarding to be able to go from focusing on my own education to be able to provide and give something to somebody else. Refugee camp was also the place where I was introduced to technology for the first time. So keep in mind, this was mid-90s, so long before the World Wide Web and cool consumer apps and devices or connectivity. But it was at that time that I actually saw the incredible potential of technology and fell in love with those like big beige boxes that used to be our computers and Windows 95. And I was so inspired by tech that once we resettled in the United States, and that was only, we were lucky to be refugees only for a year. Once we resettled, I went on to studying computer science and later media arts and sciences, and then working in tech sector, first at Adobe and then Microsoft, and then ed tech space for the last 16 years. So, why am I sharing this with you before I bring our esteemed panelists on stage? Well, first, I want you to know that the refugee crisis is not numbers to me or even to Rami. It's actually people like my parents, my little brother, my friends, or myself making a really difficult decision to leave everything behind and become refugees in order to save our lives. I'm also sharing this with you to amplify what Anna was talking about, which is when given opportunity, education, jobs, refugees can become the agents of change in their communities as teachers or entrepreneurs, future innovators, or humanitarian workers. And the last point is that I'm also sharing with you my strong belief that technology, I believe that over the past, 22 years, the technology can help us do better in the humanitarian response. So a lot has changed since mid-90s, and there's some bad news that Jan articulated so well and by sharing the magnitude of the crisis. So in '95, there were 27 million displaced, about 14 million refugees. Today, over 65 million displaced. And right this minute, as I'm speaking, 20 babies, children, youth, parents are fleeing and becoming refugees. So it's not stopping at this number, unfortunately. And protractedness of the crisis has come up to 17 to 20 years on average, a person spending as a refugee before they can either go home or resettle or integrate into their community. But there's some good news, and both Jan and Anna amplify that, and the good news are actually at the core of the work that we're doing at NetHope with connectivity and also the No Loss Generation Technology Task Force that's connecting the private and tech sector expertise and resources with the needs of displaced children and youth, including education and employment. So what are the good news? I'll highlight two, and then we'll have a great conversation on stage about both of them. One is technology. So a lot obviously has changed, and we have connectivity, we have consumer devices, we have apps like Skype and Facebook. They're enabling distance learning or mentoring, digital certification, remote work for displaced populations. The other thing that has changed is that in mid-90s, I was a beneficiary of private sector involvement in supporting refugees when I took that computer class. But since then, companies, large and small, established in startups like Okta, are coming together to support refugees with their resources, with their expertise, with their business practices like hiring, as well as their innovations. So that's exactly what we'll focus on in the next few minutes as we talk about how cross-sector collaboration, and I'll amplify cross-stakeholder collaboration that also includes refugees and the local communities, how technology-enabled solutions and also evidence-based approach can help us meet the both urgent and ongoing needs of displaced children, youth, and adults. And I'll note that these topics are not just relevant for the humanitarian sector. In fact, they're very much applied to development and conservancy too. So now I'm so honored to welcome on stage an amazing group of humanitarians whose organizations represent some of the excellent work that all of you are doing to support displaced populations. So first up, we have, let me go to the next slide, Jane Messick from Microsoft Philanthropies, Becca Milner from the International Medical Corps, Dan Baker from the Accenture Development Partnerships, and Paul Frizzoli from the International Rescue Committee. Thank you for joining me today. How much time do we have? 20 minutes. And in the interest of time, we won't be taking any audience questions on stage, but we'll all be available today and tomorrow. So to get us started, I think it is important to share with the audience how your organization is supporting displaced children, youth, and adults, and specifically what problems you're solving and why you're doing that. So let's start with Jane.
Thanks, Leila. Happy to be here. As folks heard yesterday in Justin's session, we launched a new organization called Tech for Social Impact in Microsoft Philanthropies that's looking left to right and how we can more holistically support the nonprofit sector and UN. He didn't mention that the UN's also in that mix. And one of the areas that is within the philanthropy and partnership space is our humanitarian action work. 2 years ago, when Microsoft Philanthropies was formed, we decided to invest pretty big in the space. We saw what was happening related to humanitarian crisis around the world. It also helped to get a phone call from President Obama asking us to do more. So it really got us moving on the area. So we launched a framework to bring more of our assets to the table to support preparedness, response, and recovery to help displaced communities create a better and more promising future for themselves. So 3 pillars to our framework is one is we empower first responders. So how are we supporting in that sudden onset crisis and also longer term crisis? A big change for us was expanding beyond natural disaster, which we've been doing for decades, to include health, famine, and man-made conflict. So now we kind of look at the full spectrum. We have a new portfolio of assets to pull from at crisis time, from our own cash giving to our employee giving to free Skype calling to free customer support. Also, we have access to our Microsoft consultants. So if you are activated in a crisis and you need a technology break fix, please come and ask us. We have the ability to spin up very well-scoped projects to help you on that. A second area that we work with is empowering humanitarian organizations. So how do we bring the benefits of technology and accelerate digital transformation for humanitarian organizations so they can do more good? Our partnership with the Center for Digital Nonprofit is a big part of that, and how we can help all of your large organizations do this, but we also do it at the grassroots level. So we work with like TechSoup to make sure that our software donations and capacity building programs are in the 236 markets around the world. So we make sure that those local level nonprofits get access to the same technology and services that the big guys get, and that works together. And the third pillar is around supporting the displaced populations themselves and the refugees in a couple different ways. One is connectivity, and information is aid, and I think we'll touch on that. And another area is supporting livelihood programming. So Anna is a great example of that type of work. But how can we help with our digital skills? So we've curated a lot of content, curriculum in many languages, put it on our website for access to that. And it's basic digital literacy to coding, but it's also, we try to wrap around with language and psychosocial. So we partner with organizations that can bring the whole full spectrum of employability to the table to go along with the digital skills that we can uniquely provide.
Great, thank you, Jane. Rebecca.
Thanks.
What is IMC doing?
Well, I mean, I think as most everyone knows, I mean, we're a global first responder to war, disaster, and disease. And in particular, we're very active in all of these protracted crises where refugees and displaced people are just forced to exist and have little access to healthcare. So International Medical Corps looks at health in its very broadest sense. Of course, we provide direct services, but we also focus on nutrition issues, livelihood support in that way, but also water, sanitation, and hygiene that impact health, and then most importantly, mental health and psychosocial support. And a couple of really relevant examples of the work that we're doing is in Jordan and Turkey. In Jordan, we're in refugee camps as well as in host communities, and I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the majority of refugees aren't in a camp setting. They're in urban environments. They're, cheek to jowl with the host community members that are often in low-income areas, and so it's important to support both the host communities as well as the refugee communities. But both in the refugee camps and outside of the refugee camps, we're operating McKinney centers, which are sort of multi-service centers where people can access different psychosocial support activities, which includes training programs on technology. We're partnering with Endless Computers, which I think is a new member of NetHope, which is an operating system that doesn't require connectivity in order to access information. And they have a lot of different programs available that teach people skills, but also just get information that they may need in a variety of languages, and they have Arabic for these refugees. And so I think that that's really an important one because, in the camps especially, connectivity is an issue, and they don't necessarily, the Jordanian government doesn't necessarily permit everyone to have connectivity. And so you need to be able to offer access to information without connectivity, and that's what Endless offers us to do. In Turkey, we have the Maharat centers where we're operating, again, multi-service centers where people can come to access different psychosocial support activities and training and livelihood support. I think everyone knows about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, the Turkish government permitted refugees to begin to access work permits. And so then it became more urgent to offer refugees opportunities to learn new skills. And so we've been partnering with HP Life to offer their suite of services to refugees. And we did a train the trainer program, so the refugees themselves were training other refugees on this sort of self-directed program around its entrepreneurship skills, technology skills that you need to start your own business. And both of those things where International Medical Corps is not the expert, but we're the venue. We offer the space, and we partner with companies like Endless or HP and many others to then provide access to these services by the refugees.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Dan?
Great, thanks, Layla. And firstly, let me say that I'm just humbled to be in a room with so many organizations that are responding to the refugee crisis. It's great for a couple of us to be up here, but I know so many NetHope members are really out there saving lives and changing lives. So I'm just humbled to be here. But I'm proud of how Accenture has stepped up over the past few years, and that's really through multiple channels. It's through our Accenture Development Partnerships group that myself and a couple others here are part of, that applies our strategy and digital capabilities to support humanitarian and development organizations, including those working in the refugee crisis. It's through our Accenture Foundation, which provides cash grants and digital tools and assets to support vocational training. It's also through Accenture's core commercial business that's engaging with companies and governments, again, also those that are supporting the refugee response. And it's also just grassroots employee-driven initiatives, which I think are some of the most exciting. An example of that is the Refugee Talent Hub in the Netherlands. Similar inspiration to what Anne was talking about, and looking for that win-win-win opportunity. An influx of people coming with skills, capabilities. Accenture and other companies have a huge demand, and it's really about that marketplace, that matchmaking opportunity, creating a Tinder or Match.com of sorts for those opportunities. And that's terrific to have the platform in place, but of course, these things don't happen overnight. It's not an Airbnb hotel room the next day if you're talking about starting a career, a long-term career at a big company. So we worked in that kind of meaningful waiting period to develop people's skills and the relevant aptitudes, many of which that Anne talked about, as well as language skills and other areas to really amplify their CVs and accelerate that matchmaking process for people. One other example, I think, really meaningful to hear more from Jan about the refugee crisis around the world. In Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, millions of people displaced. So Accenture partnered with UNHCR to really modernize how aid is distributed to IDPs and refugees, so creating a biometric information management system. Accenture has worked on the leading biometric systems around the world, whether it's the global entry that you might use if you're going into the US, or the cross-border systems in Europe, the systems in India. We take it for granted, right? You put your fingers on and in 2 seconds it says you're good to go in, right? There's a lot of technology that goes behind that. So bringing that skills and experience to UNHCR means that you're really accelerating how they're providing services to refugees, and of course, hopefully reducing fraud in the system as well. So yeah, just a couple of examples.
Thank you. And Paul?
Great, thanks. Well, thanks so much for having me here and having the IRC. For those who may not know the IRC, we are an international NGO who has a mission of supporting those people whose lives and livelihoods have been shattered by conflict and crisis to survive, to recover, and then to gain control of their future. And I sit on our education team, and really we think about ways that we can provide support to children and youth in the short term to survive and to recover. We know education is life-saving, and that it can really help kids find safe spaces and protect them, but also thinking about the long term to take control of their future. And we know education has impacts for so many of us who are in this room today to be able to do what we're doing. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was our social emotional learning programs. At the IRC, we are looking at recent developments in neuroscience and how neuroscience really talks about the different types of adversity that refugee children and youth and all adults really face, and how that has an impact on the way that our brain functions. And we know that being part of these major crises has an effect on things like the ability to control your impulses, to be able to focus, to do basic functions. And so research is also showing that has an impact on children's ability to learn. So at the IRC, we're using different types of evidence from contexts like the US or Europe or other middle-income countries that really demonstrate that when you focus on social-emotional programs, cognitive functioning programs, that kids are able to kind of undo the impacts of toxic stress that so many children and youth face, so that they can be well, but also that there are connections to their learning and their future outcomes. So at IRC, we're really interested in not only using evidence-based programming, but how can we also work to generate evidence? This is such a field where we've been focusing more on how we can get kids into school, how we can get kids access to learning opportunities or to livelihoods opportunities. But we don't necessarily know what's going on in those spaces. Are kids learning? Are kids well? Are our psychosocial support and social-emotional learning programs actually having an impact? And so this is one of the things that we're doing at the IRC, is to generate evidence, share the evidence of impact, also share the evidence of things that are not working, so that we know what is really going to make a difference in a child's life. And we know certain programming that may not make a difference, and how we might be able to course correct based on our programs that may not be operating the way that we intend. And that's a hard thing to do in these contexts where we're so used to acting fast. And we're asking people in our programs to act fast, but also think slow. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you for emphasizing the evidence. So Jan talked about achieving greater impact together, and Anna emphasized what together means is not just humanitarian actors, so humanitarian sector and private sector. It is also refugees and local communities being involved. What does it take to have a successful cross-sector, cross-stakeholder partnership? And if you could continue to share some of the examples, and both successful but also unsuccessful.
I'll start. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the very first things that it takes is an understanding of the context in which you're operating. And that context, it may be it's low resource setting, there's no connectivity, but it also might be that you have many players that are involved in your work, whether it might be UNHCR, it might be the local Jordanian government if you're talking about Jordan, it might be the local commissions that are formed or groups that are formed within the refugee camp. It's really having all the stakeholders around the table, understanding the context that we're working in, and sort of making sure that that's a mutual understanding and that we're talking about things in the same language. And then I think the next thing is setting expectations among all the different parties, and really being clear about what it is you're hoping to accomplish. And the worst thing that you can do is set the expectation of somebody that you're serving and not meet that. And so that's really another really important piece. And the other piece is communication among all of the stakeholders. And I think sometimes we underestimate the amount of time and attention and care and feeding that we need among each of our partners, and I think that that's a really important thing. And then, really feedback and sort of just follow up and making sure that you're following through. And I'd say that those are really things that make a partnership successful. I think those are the things that you need to have in place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I completely agree. That platform is exactly right. Mercy Corps joked recently that also a great partnership, you have to be able to drink beers together and have a sense of humor and make sure you're open and honest so that things can be redirected and corrected as you go. You have to be able to have that open and honest dialogue as you go along. Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. And I want to give a plug for the No Loss Generation Private Sector Engagement Toolkit, because I think that for companies in the room here, it's worth checking out, because it really lays out that the three pillars of cash giving and philanthropy and CSR are very important, but certainly working through a company's core business to achieve impact, and thinking about how the private sector can lend its voice in advocacy to kind of differentiate the voice of the NGO as well. I think all three of those areas are very important. What I would say in our experience, and yes, this is a private sector biased view probably, but I feel it's a little bit like the iceberg analogy sometimes, that the smaller part of the iceberg is the part that's above the ocean, right? There's a massive iceberg below it. And I think sometimes the NGOs are very squarely focused on the tip of the iceberg, that we need a cash donation. And yes, cash is hugely important. Accenture gives cash. But if you're really thinking about leveraging the power of the company, thinking about what they do as a core business, how can those kind of in-kind contributions, whether it's services or products, how can you incorporate those into your program? So I think that's important. And I like to think our work with Habitat Turkey, which is different than Habitat for Humanity, which is another great organization. Habitat Turkey, 20 years there on the ground, focused on developing entrepreneurship skills, coming in through our support to Youth Business International to help develop the program, engage with the private sector on the key needs, as well as help develop the mentoring program, which is going to reach 5,000 people in Turkey alone, which is really exciting. A quick point on what doesn't work, I would say very similar to Rebecca's point. I use the analogy of four people looking at a house, right? And one person, the front of the house sees the door and the front porch. The other person sees a chimney and on the side of the house, another back porch in the back of the house. You get the analogy there, but unless everyone kind of takes a moment to step around to the other sides of the house, they're just saying, yeah, we all see a house, but they're actually seeing, what they see is very different, and that sometimes is the partnership where people have a different idea. We're all in it. We made a press release where this is definitely a house, but individually people have a different thing in mind, and we experienced that actually going back to work in Haiti, right, where there's so much aid coming in, and I'm not going to name agencies and donors, but a large multilateral donor bringing us in to work with a government agency that was really sorely equipped, and that government agency, why wouldn't they say yes to what the donor put forward, right? They don't have the resources, anything helps, right? But our scope of work was not achievable when there was employees that were just showing up to work hoping they might get paid. So we really had to retool what we were going to do based on the reality and the context that Rebecca talked about.
Yeah.
I'll be brief, but one of the things I did want to talk about is working with our clients. So I was really happy to hear that, in the previous presentation, that it's really designing with our clients. So this is one of the things at the IRC we've done for the last 20 years in education. So our Healing Classrooms program is really ways to focus on how to help children survive and recover. And the only way we could do that was by talking to teachers, talking to parents, talking to kids, doing action research to figure out, well, how do our clients define well-being, and then how can we address that? And then once we design with our clients in mind, what type of satisfaction surveys and different satisfaction methods can we use to understand if our program is being absorbed by kids and by teachers and by parents. And one of the things that we're finding is that through different platforms work in different places. So for example, we were using WhatsApp to send parents, which is a very hard to reach vulnerable community population, send parents multimedia messages on how they can support their children's well-being at home. And this worked very well in Lebanon and Jordan. This did not work well at all in Nyarugusu refugee camp in Tanzania. Parents in Tanzania, not all of the mothers who received our messages could read. So there are other things that we need to keep in mind in not only designing with our clients, but also getting the satisfaction that our clients deserve.
Yeah, great. And just to follow up on what Dan mentioned, so we do have the No Loss Generation private engagement guide that goes into more details in terms of how private sector can get involved. That includes CSR, so cash, in-kind donations, employee volunteers, but also it includes some excellent examples around how you can leverage some of the core business practices, like hiring, for example, hiring refugees, as well as core product development, so leveraging that innovation to develop products that are and services that are specifically serving the needs of refugees. And then also policy and advocacy, which is incredibly important to ensure that those whose voice otherwise would not be heard, they're heard and their needs are met. So with just almost a minute left, I do want to come back to one of the key topics of this summit, which is innovation, and including tech, but also to, as Lauren outlined yesterday, people, processes, and technology. So what do you think are some of the innovations, again, keeping in mind people, process, and technology, that have the potential to help us do better in the humanitarian response?
I can, if you don't mind, I can just say very briefly, I think the idea of generating evidence is innovative for the humanitarian sector. We've been so focused on access and delivering services and achieving outputs. I think now is the shift where it's all about outcomes and how the evidence we generate can help that. I think the tech sector is very well placed to help us figure out ways to generate that evidence quickly and analyze it quickly. This is a major challenge that we're having, and we act fast in the humanitarian sector. The folks that I work with, they want to deploy and they want to deliver. And then they want to learn about our programs. So how can we learn about our programs quickly to be able to course correct?
Wonderful.
Maybe one other quick example of innovation, actually working together with Microsoft that we've been really excited about. This ID 2020 blockchain pilot that some of you might have read, really actually innovating to put identity information in the blockchain. It's actually a public key, so it's not personal data that goes into the blockchain. I can't explain blockchain in 10 minutes, let alone one minute, but I think from a humanity standpoint, what gets really remarkable is this has the potential to really put identification truly in the hands of the individual, not some physical artifact, driver's license or a diploma that, gosh, when we were at the No Lost Generation Symposium, you showed the video of somebody in Lebanon, I believe, who didn't have opportunities just because they couldn't access their school transcripts back in Syria. So when this is really in the palm of your hand, it's actually your biometrics, your eye or your fingerprint that provides access, and you have control over who you provide that to, and your identification becomes a series of attestations over time that different organizations you allow them to access. That's a game changer, and access, again, that ID provides so much more to these other services. So it's working with Microsoft, something that we're excited about.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I would just echo what Paul was saying around evidence, I mean, and the innovations around that, and also just feedback from our beneficiaries, and how we collect that information, how we sort of sort through it, analyze it, and then apply it and adapt it to the different programs that we're working in. I think that there is a lot that our private sector partners can bring to the table to help us do that. And I think that that's where the next phase of innovation is going to be for the humanitarian sector.
Last thing, I want to touch on the connectivity and information for and information as aid. One of the partnerships we've been working with IRC and Mercy Corps, Google, Cisco, TripAdvisor, Microsoft is the Refugee.info platform, which sits on connectivity that we all helped set up in Greece. But it provides information to refugees when they need it and how they need it, from basic social service information to asylum information. It's across a web platform, Facebook, phone apps. And what's interesting is the data that is behind all of that we can unlock to understand what kind of things the refugees need, what is resonating with them to get the information that they need. There was a Facebook Live chat that was done, 25,000 views of this Facebook Live chat. And so learning what is important to refugees, how to connect to additional information is pretty brilliant. And it's really neat to watch, and we're really happy to continue to support the replication of that effort.
Wonderful, thank you. We're way over time. I know we can continue this conversation over coffee. Hopefully this has inspired some new ideas for new partnerships, and also given you a couple of ideas of how your cross-sector partnerships or technology work or evidence-based approach could be augmented with the learnings from this great group. Thank you very much for joining us on stage today, and thank you.